For a long time, ostentatious displays of wealth were the exclusive preserve of the nobility and the world's most powerful families. Events with these wealthy individuals rocked society and occupied a lot of space in the media, with the right to magazine covers and exclusive coverage. With the rise of social media, bragging rights have become more popular. But even so, some rich people still steal the limelight. Bragging about private jets, million-dollar cars, or trips to paradisiacal places has become commonplace. However, even in the midst of so much ostentation, some billionaires prefer a discreet life, far from the red carpets and spotlights that fame attracts. The reasons for this social isolation may simply be the choice of a simpler lifestyle, but in some cases it may be related to the past and the origin of the fortune. This is precisely the case of the Quandt family, one of the richest and most powerful in Germany, which does everything possible to remain anonymous, while getting richer every day and hiding the dark past that generated all this wealth. How did this family get so much money in a way that needs to be hidden? What companies do the Quandts control, and how much money do they currently have? If you want to know the answers, just watch this video, because today we're going to expand our global knowledge about the mysterious Quandt family. Anyone looking at the Quandt family's net worth, close to $50 billion today, may not have a clue, but it all started from humble beginnings. The family, of Dutch origin, moved to Germany around 1700. However, it wasn't until nearly 2 centuries later that the Quandt business story began. More specifically in 1883, when Emil Quandt founded a textile factory in the small town of Pritzwalk, near Berlin. Considered a hard-working entrepreneur, he quickly managed to grow the business and acquired other companies in the same sector. One of the secrets of Emil's business success was a contract for his weavers to supply the fabrics for the uniforms of the German Imperial Army. This contract, signed in 1890, brought him large sums of money and also a rapprochement with the government that would only increase over the years. The founder had great achievements in business, but nothing comparable to the success achieved by his son and successor. Günther Quandt began working with his father at a very young age, and by 1909 he was already managing several of the family's weaving mills. With the outbreak of World War I in 1914, the family won excellent government contracts and became the main supplier of fabrics and leather to the German army. At the end of the conflicts, Germany was destroyed, but the Quandt family was wealthier than before, and Günther took advantage of the opportunities that arose to increase the family empire. In between acquiring power plants and other companies, Günther bought a majority stake in the AFA company, which in turn owned the battery manufacturer Varta, which became one of the most important in the industry. During this period, he also acquired important stakes in the automobile sector, buying shares in the already established Daimler-Benz, owner of the prestigious Mercedes brand, and also in BMW, which by 1928 was taking its first steps in automobile production. If things were going well for Günther Quandt in business, we cannot say the same for his personal life, with some events that can be considered remarkable not only for the family, but also for the modern history of Germany. The businessman first married Antony Ewald, and the couple had 2 sons, Helmuth and Herbert. As fate would have it, the entrepreneur's wife died in 1918 at the age of 34, and his eldest son Helmuth met the same fate a few years later. After the tragedy, Günther married again, this time to Magda Ritschl, who was half his age, and from this union another heir was born, who was christened Harold. The marriage lasted about 8 years, and, once it was over, Magda remarried. It may seem irrelevant to the family's history, but Magda married Joseph Goebbels, who became the all-powerful Minister of Propaganda in Nazi Germany. Although there are reports of some animosity between Goebbels and Günther, the love triangle did not prevent the businessman from strengthening relations with Adolf Hitler's government, which began in 1933. Günther and his son Herbert joined the Nazi Party, while Harold, who was practically raised by Goebbels and his mother, served in the German forces, fighting in World War II. The closeness between the Quandts and the Nazi regime is evident in Günther's appointment as Chief of Military Economics, a highly prestigious position granted by the Führer himself. But was this the only involvement of the family in this government and the atrocities it committed? When World War II began, the family's position was very different. With all the investments made in the interwar period, the Quandts went from supplying only textiles to supplying the German army with many other products. In this scenario, in addition to supplying uniforms and blankets to the soldiers, the family manufactured weapons, ammunition, and, thanks to the acquisition of the AFA company, which I mentioned earlier, even produced the propulsion batteries for the submarines and missiles used by the Nazis. Negotiating with governments and supplying arms and military material is relatively common in the business world, and many great businessmen have built their fortunes in this way. But in the case of the Quandt family, this relationship went even further. According to an article published in the New York Times, the family took advantage of the persecution of the Jews and bought several companies for much less than they were worth. There is also the accusation, cited in the same article, that the companies run by Gunther and his son Herbert used forced labor of more than 57,000 people in their factories. Herbert Quandt himself was allegedly involved in the planning and construction of a concentration camp in Poland, which was never completed. With the defeat of Germany in World War II and the division of territory among the Allied powers, one might have thought that the Quandts and other dynasties that had supported Hitler would be punished for their actions. However, the reality was quite different. The patriarch of the family at the time, Gunther Quandt, was arrested in 1946, but was acquitted just 2 years later, leaving him free to continue his business. Like many other industrialists accused of war crimes, Gunther was acquitted on the grounds that he was just a follower, and that everything he did lacked any ideology or motivation. This group was also referred to as fellow travelers, a term intended to indicate that, although they had participated in various atrocities, they were only following orders from the one who actually organized the tour. There is much debate about the reasons that led to this acquittal, with some scholars claiming that economic issues spoke louder in the sentences. One such voice is David de Jong, author of the book Nazi Billionaires, who claims that the Nuremberg trials were flawed, and that behind the acquittals was the goal of keeping the West German economy stronger than the Soviet-controlled part. Gunther took advantage of his freedom and remained at the helm of the business for several more years, until he passed away in 1954. With the death of the patriarch, Herbert and Harold took over the business and created a division in the areas that each was to control. Generally speaking, while Harold was in charge of the Quandts industrial holdings, Herbert was in charge of the battery and automobile factories. Even with the acquittal for the crimes and with so much business, the family always tried to keep a low profile, operating more behind the scenes than on the big stage. At the time, at least from a business standpoint, the family's portfolio was enviable. In addition to owning more than 65% of the Varta battery factory, they controlled almost half of the equipment manufacturer IWK and had significant stakes in many other companies, such as Daimler-Benz. In the midst of so many successful businesses, one stood out precisely because of its risk of bankruptcy. The family owned about 30% of BMW, a company that had been founded in 1917 to manufacture aircraft engines. Over the years, the company began to manufacture motorcycles and cars, but in the period after World War II, it was practically bankrupt. The situation was so critical that the acquisition of BMW by Daimler-Benz was taken for granted. But Herbert went against all recommendations and decided to take a stake in the company, increasing its shareholding to more than 50%. From 1959, with control of the company, Herbert changed the helm of the company and also became personally involved in the management. A few years later, in 1962, the BMW 1500 arrived on the market, a sedan considered revolutionary, which achieved great commercial success and is still considered today, without any exaggeration, the car that saved the company from bankruptcy. In the end, Herbert's gamble proved to be the right one, and his involvement in the company further enriched the family. The success, as can be imagined, brought a lot of attention to the entrepreneur, but he always kept a low profile, so typical of the family. During his time at the helm of part of the family business, Herbert Quandt had to deal with the death of his brother and the division of the estate. Harold died in a plane crash in 1967, and his wife and daughters inherited most of the Quandt shareholding in Daimler-Benz, among other businesses. This branch of the family also tries to stay out of the spotlight, mainly because they are descendants of someone who worked directly with Hitler as the stepson of Joseph Goebbels. According to a report in the Jerusalem Post, All of Harold's living heirs have a fortune estimated at $18 billion. But back to Herbert. When he died in 1982, part of his vast business empire was divided among his 6 children, born from 3 different marriages. In addition to all the companies I have mentioned throughout the video, he also owned the chemical pharmaceutical company Altana, not to mention many others in very diverse sectors. The crown jewel of the Quandt empire, BMW, was left in the hands of Herbert's last wife and the couple's 2 children. According to a report by the German portal Deutsche Welle, Herbert Quandt spent the last years of his life organizing his empire and preparing the distribution of his assets so that no family dispute could jeopardize the family fortune. It seems to have worked, and the family has maintained its century-old tradition of doing business, making money, and staying in the shadows. But how long has it been possible to hide? And how do the new generations deal with the family's dark past? Shortly after Herbert's death, his widow Johanna Quandt became a major player in the business, holding senior positions at both BMW and Altana. Her fortune grew considerably until she became the richest woman in Germany. Even so, she was virtually unknown in the country and led a totally reclusive lifestyle. After her retirement, her children Suzanne and Stefan became the visible faces of the family, or not so much, as both also maintained the family tradition of avoiding public exposure. However, despite all their efforts, the family's past came to light in 2007, when a documentary entitled The Silence of the Quandts was made public. The authors of the documentary spent more than 5 years researching and finding the entire history of the family in thousands of documents. From that moment on, German society learned about the past of one of the richest and most powerful families in the country, with the power to decide the future of hundreds of thousands of people. And perhaps they also understood the reasons for their aversion to public appearances. The documentary shows the thousands of forced laborers used in the family's factories, as well as the torture inflicted on many of them to meet production targets. The initial reaction of Gunther and Herbert's heirs was denial. In some of his statements at the time, Stefan Quandt declared that the documentary was a fraud and that it tarnished the history of his ancestors. But faced with the damage these accusations could do to the family's image and business, the Quandts decided to hire a historian to investigate the family's past. After 3 years, the studies only confirmed what had already been revealed in the documentary, but the family made no gesture of apologizing for the past, or at least trying to repair the damage. Stefan Quandt has only spoken once on the subject, and, in between some acknowledgments of crimes committed by his grandfather, such as the use of forced labor, he has made a point of defending his ancestor, stating that he was not an anti-Semite or an instigator of wars. Facts are more important than words, and it has taken the family more than a decade and some pressure to change Herbert Quandt's biography on the official website of an award named after him. Although they partly admit to the crimes committed, the name of the group's headquarters remains Gunther Quandt, and each year the family organizes an award for journalists named after Herbert Quandt. While struggling to keep part of their past in oblivion, the Quandts remain one of the richest families in the world, ranking 14th in the Bloomberg ranking published in 2023, with a fortune of almost $50 billion. According to the ranking compiled by Statista.com, Stefan has a fortune of just over $24 billion and is the 4th richest German, while his sister Suzanne is just behind, in 5th place, with approximately $23 billion. A family that really has a lot to hide. If you liked the video, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to receive more amazing content. Thanks to all of you who joined us, and see you next time.